right, everyone. Welcome to Life Has No Control at Delete. I am your host, Heather Mahalik, and with us today we have Sherman Holman. How is that? Was that like Matt?
It's almost as good as Matt. Yeah, that was great.
And we're discussing steganography today. So this is, you are the first on the show to discuss steganography with us, and it's a nice change up from the daily conversation. So we appreciate you being on the show.
Well, good. I hope it's a mix of new stuff and things that people don't already know about.
All right, I will let you take over. And as always, if you have questions, please post them in the chat. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask Sherman directly.
Okay, hi, Sherman Holman here, coming to you from an undisclosed location somewhere in the metro Boston area. Today we're going to talk about steganography, the art of concealing important information in not important disguises. Steganography has been a backwater in criminal discovery because it does not lend itself to easily manipulating large amounts of continuous data. Rather, steganography is most useful when trying to conceal relatively static documents. Despite this narrow channel, or maybe because of its limited reach, steganography is often overlooked in digital forensics. Now, the desire to protect information transcends morals and ethics. We all want to hide our data regardless if our intent is to look at kitty cats playing on YouTube or plotting to sell stolen Bitcoin on the dark web. We look for HTTPS so that we can rely on transport layer security for our web traffic, MIME for email, 256-bit encryption for hard drives. All these various data streams may be additionally encrypted inside a VPN. But steganography is a different way to hide data. It's more like hiding in plain sight than bits scrambled to the wind. It most commonly comes into play when someone needs to keep files under strict control. This is the case of the Al-Qaeda terrorist who stored more than 140 directives from Osama bin Laden hidden in a skin flick video. More disgustingly is the case of the Shadows Brotherhood, child pornographers who kept the graphic records of their sickness readily available but hidden in pictures that looked completely innocuous. There are, of course, good moral reasons for steganography. In the medical world, steganography has been used in X-rays, CAT scans, and MRIs to hide detailed private information of a patient's identity, diagnosis, and treatment. Let's imagine an individual patient's file showing up on the jumbotron of a large medical conference or a training seminar. Here we're outside the safety of a hospital domain, away from a VPN or any secure network. Neither the presenter nor the audience is known. The graphic itself needs to be clear and legible to the observing public, while at the same time, the personal data needs to be concealed in that graphic, identifiable only to the patient and those who have HIPAA approval. Here on public display is information critical to the progress of the medical community, but concealed within the graphic is the patient's name, healthcare provider, primary care physician, treatment regimen, prognosis, all the possible risks of violating the identity of the patient, but safely concealed through steganography. In recent legal events, they have determined that under certain circumstances, the mere existence of encrypted files on a computer can be considered proof of guilty activity if the accused refuses to grant access. This is opposed to a steganography file, which is not encrypted. It looks harmless, so that even if it's discovered, it never comes to the attention of anyone other than the owner. Steganography has the same etymological roots as stegosaurus, which in Greek means roofed lizard. Here is a rare picture from a famous documentary, one of the last stegosaurus ever seen. As you can tell, this beast has protected itself with a cover of triangular plates on its back. So steganography means roofed writing in Greek. In other words, writing covered with a protective layer. Fun fact, Stegosaurus deliberately ate stones in their digestion of eating plants. Speaking of Greeks, the use of steganography spans human history from the first recorded mention by the Greek historian Herodotus in 440 BC, in which he relates the story of a warrior named Demaratus, who wrote of a warning of an impending attack on the wood surface of a tablet. He then layered the wood with wax, and that contained another non-related message. Steganography also spans cultures. In 1368 AD, the Chinese Yuan dynasty, characterized by the brutal state of invading Mongolians, ended in part because of a rebellion organized by people baking rice paper messages inside mooncakes. There are many ways to hide information in a file, even if that file is made of wood and wax or an edible mooncake. Today, in the past, as it was in the past, the only limit to the types of steganographic techniques is human imagination. There's even a technique called steganographic edge detection using discrete cosine transformation. We're not going there today, mainly because I have absolutely no idea what that even means. Let's open a JPEG file, a Mac OS 11 wallpaper picture of Big Sur. And let's crack it open with a hex editor. Every JPEG file has a signature that starts with FFD8. At the other end of the signature, the file ends with FFD9. As long as the start file and the end file of the signature is intact, you can append any file you want after that end of file marker. Whoops, let me back up just a touch here. Now let's insert a PDF file inside this JPEG file. This is Heidi, a notorious nation-state actor that we've seen before, and we will see her again. But we need to introduce her to our fellow operatives. Using a very rudimentary steganography technique, we will email the pretty picture of Big Sur with Heidi inserted inside that JPEG, even though the picture of Heidi is a PDF. Just to be clear, as you all know, every file format has its own signature, and this technique will work with any file format that I know of. PDFs also have a signature. It starts with %PDF and ends with the brilliant abbreviation EOF, which obviously means end of file. Now, we're going to grab everything on the right side of the hex screen, everything that's in blue, with the exception of the PDF signature itself, which you can see right up at the top. You open the Big Sur JPEG file, look for the JPEG end of file marker, FFD9, and paste in the raw text from the PDF after the FFD9 marker. When the bad guys get this file, they're going to reverse this process. They'll look for the JPEG end of file FFD9 and copy everything after it to a new file. Then they just need to close and copy. Now, when I double-click the file, I have the exact same Big Sur file that I had before. It looks and acts like a JPEG file. It identifies as a JPEG file. The only difference is that the one that has the Heidi file embedded in it is another almost 1 meg larger. But larger compared to what? There is no standard size for a picture of Big Sur. I said that I wanted to introduce my nation-state operatives to Heidi, so I emailed them a copy of Big Sur with the embedded PDF. They knew beforehand that they would get a large JPEG file and that they would need to go to the FFD9 JPEG file marker and select everything after it. Then they would have to add the PDF signature to make it open. But once the PDF signature is added, the picture is identical. You can even run through it with a hash comparison. That is, if you can find an email of the graphic without compression. Compression algorithms break hidden files. JPEG is designed to compress files, thus the awkward term lossy. The process of creating a JPEG file from an original RAW file scans the picture for areas of similar pixel characteristics and smooths out adjoining colors and deliberately throws away pixels by design. At risk of oversimplification, the 24-bit 20 meg RAW file from a Nikon camera contains way more information than most people need to understand the graphic. Saving a copy of the JPEG reduces the file size for faster email transmission. No one looking at these two pictures can tell the difference on a computer monitor. It might show up on a high-end glossy color print, where the differences will become more obvious. If I send the embedded picture of Heidi with Apple Mail and insert the graphic as actual size, the entire file comes through to the recipient unaffected. The file size stays the same. The embedded PDF arrives hidden but intact just the way I want it. However, if I choose large, a series of lightweight compression algorithms kick in. The file arrives much smaller than its original size, but more important and more interestingly, it is smart enough to know that there shouldn't be anything past that JPEG end of file marker, and it deletes the hidden PDF of Heidi, the secret agent. Let's look at a more sophisticated but relatively simple technique. There are many ways to express color in digital form. Every pixel on a monitor has a numeric value that can be described with several mathematical techniques. Here is one of my favorites, the web safe color of tomato. Web designers work primarily with red, green, and blue values. Code mechanics work with hex. Machine operators work with binary. They're all numerical representations of tomato. Steganographers can use these numeric properties to hide one graphic inside another. One of the most common yet technologically sophisticated methods of hiding a graphic file inside another graphic file is the least significant bit, a technique used by the terrorist group Al-Qaeda and child pornographers. The least significant bit of any binary value is simply that, the bit with the least numeric number. In a base 10, the least significant value is in here, in this number, is the number 9. It may have the highest individual value, but in context of the number, it is the smallest. Changing it, adding 1 to it, or subtracting 7 from it will have the least impact on the value of the whole number. Similarly, in base 2, the least significant bit is simply the furthest number on the right. A practical example of using 8-bit range from the least significant bit to the most significant bit is embedding watermarks. Let's look at what Leonardo da Vinci could have done 500 years ago if he only had Photoshop. A watermark using the least significant bit would be hidden from sight. Increasing the bit used in the watermark makes the watermark gradually more visible. When trying to hide a picture in a picture, it would obviously make sense to change the least important value to protect the overall visual integrity of the covering graphic. But in some cases, cranking up the bit hierarchy has its uses too. We've all seen watermarks used to protect copywritten photographs. Let's go back to the HTML safe color of tomato. We saw its RGB decimal code of 255.99.71, its hex value of FF6347, and its binary representation. The least significant bit of the binary representation is simply the last digit on the right, the one with the smallest value. So let's start with the first row, which is simply a repetition of the color tomato. This is our starting point. All 8 color fields to the right are the same. The second row is the binary representation of red, blue, and green numerical values. Let's take a look at the blue channel. I cleverly outlined it in blue. I'm going to add 1 to the value of each bit of significance. Just to be clear, this number, 01000111, is the binary representation of the shade of blue that is in tomato. And no, I didn't know tomato had any blue in it either. It's sort of like going to your local hardware store to mix up a custom color of paint. In the third row, from left to right, in decreasing significance, is the bit that we're going to change. We're going to add 1 in the fourth row from the most, 6th, 5th, 4th, 3rd, 1st, and least, but most importantly least, the least bit at the very end. The 6th row is what the new color looks like. The 7th row is the color in hex. Even here, I can't see any difference between the 4th and 5th bits. The colors look the same to me, working from the least bit to the most significant bit. Somewhere around the 4th or 5th bit, you can start to see some variations. But that's a lot of pixels that can be changed without anybody noticing what's going on. So now let's try to think like a bad guy. Instead of adding some random number, let's start with the original tomato and add the word secrets, again, to just the blue channel. Each of the letters in secrets is broken into its binary equivalent, capital S, lowercase e, c, r, e, t, s, exclamation point, and then converted to its hex equivalent with a corresponding color. But the new changes stand out as obviously different because the original carrier file, tomato, is composed of identical pixels. As we can see, this is a limitation of monochromatic files. Oops. This brings a conundrum to the human eye and computer monitors. This is a concept of human cognitive perception in general and the specific use of criminal steganography. It is widely understood that the human eye can see and can identify some 11 million different colors. However, most of those studies have been done with test participants comparing large individual color samples simultaneously, side by side, as it were. In studies where one color sample is presented, then removed, and a combination sample is then offered, the number of correctly identified custom colors plunges to just a few hundred. Boop. The incredibly rich color palette of a computer monitor and the physically tiny form of pixels makes comparison, contrast, difference identification much more difficult. In the case of a standard 1080 by 1920 display, there is more than 2 million pixels, each with a 24 graphic capability of 770,000 potential variations for a total of 34 trillion possible colors. Graphic files contain large amounts of information that can be slightly modified so that the viewer can't see the difference. The very foundation of JPEG compression relies on the fact that you can throw away and/or modify large numbers without being able to see the difference. Let's make a stego, a hidden picture that we'll send to our evil nation-state operatives. Here are two pictures. The first is the cover file of the open blue ocean with waves, pretty but meaningless. The second is the important file that we want to hide and ultimately transmit to the bad guy. This is his getaway car, a shiny red Jaguar XKE parked against a green hedge. The next picture is the getaway car, the stego, hidden in the ocean view. The cover modifying only the least significant bit. There is no perceptible difference between the original blue and the stego using the least significant bit. To my mind, this would violate everything I know about red, blue, green color schemas. In theory, it should be immediately obvious where red and green pixels get added to a blue file. However, adding pixels at the least significant bit through bit 3 does not affect the file to the human eye. There is no significant difference until about the 4th significant bit. Here, the getaway car is perceptually still hidden. However, problems with the file begin to emerge, key for criminal digital forensics. Posterization is obvious, but only in the nearly monochromatic gray sky. The Jaguar hedge are still not visible in the water because there's still enough stochastic shades of blue and white to provide adequate cover. The 5th is the stego using the most significant bit, and the getaway car is clearly emerging from the waves, and the hedge is beginning to take over the sky. What if we chose a picture that was closer in color structure to the picture we want to hide? Surprisingly, it doesn't seem to matter. Choosing a cover picture that has a similar color palette to the hidden file results in the same experience as the extremes of more pure red, green, and blue files. For example, here's a picture of my backyard this past fall, along with the identity of our notorious nation-state actor hard at work on her computer. The color palettes are intuitively similar, as opposed to the previous getaway car example. When we create the stego, there is no perceptible difference using the least significant bit, bit 1, bit 2, or bit 3. However, posterization begins to appear at bit 4, and then the actual identity of the hidden file is much more obvious using the most significant bit. Further frustrating digital forensic analysts is that there is rarely any specific master file which can be used as an original point of reference. For example, I could embed a stego of an intended target in a picture of the Eiffel Tower, but the digital analyst has nothing to compare it to, no hope of a master modified picture. The following pictures of the Eiffel Tower include a picture-perfect postcard on a sunny day, a partial shot of the tower on a cloudy day with a rainbow, a brightly lit nightscape, an abstract rendering, and finally the tower under construction. Which one of them has the secret recipe for Coca-Cola in it? Which one has the design for the core of the uranium dirty bomb? None of them are correct master pictures from which a definitive reference can be made, yet all of them are instantly recognizable as the Eiffel Tower, despite their considerable differences. Least significant bit steganography is one of the most common, yet technologically effective methods for successfully hiding graphic files inside an innocuous cover. Granted that steganography can be used for both morally good and bad reason, the major focus shifts to discover illegal activities, specifically against pedophiles and terrorists. We will need the development of far more powerful diagnostic tools if we stand a chance to keep an eye on the criminal element who use the fire hose of data spewing out from Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and others. Thank you, and I would be happy to answer any questions to the best of my ability.
Thank you. How sore does that make your eyes, or tired does it make your eyes to sit there and look at those colors?
I did a whole series of desktop publishing um, classes when print was still a desired medium. So I know Photoshop and Illustrator, and even back to the days of PageMaker. So I've gone through color wheels and monitor displays a whole lot.
Any other questions for Sherman?
I got one. Sherman, some applications use compression format, so they take your picture and compress it to send it through, like, for example, WhatsApp. Would there be a difficult aspect, or would that make it even more difficult to try to find that?
Yeah. Yeah, it makes it much more difficult, because one of the most powerful tools for determining if a file has got a buried file in it is to look at how random the least significant bit is. The more random the least significant bit, the less chance that there's an embedded file in it. When you embed files, the least significant bit becomes more and more predictable. And if it becomes more predictable, then you can start looking at it in terms of extracting a potentially hidden file. So when you use compression for, YouTube or running some stuff up on TikTok or something like that, those compression algorithms mess with the ability of that, not the ability, mess with the existence of the random nature of the least significant bit. It makes those least significant bits more random, thereby hiding the picture better.
Thank you. That's awesome.
So there is a question in the chat, Sherman. I don't know if you can see it, but it's, are there good tools which we can use to decipher the compressions?
Very limited and very specific to the type of compressions that are used. I mentioned earlier the steganography technique of cosine edge detection. That gets into a realm of mathematics that I don't understand at all. I'm working on trying to get a better understanding of it, and I'd be glad to share some of that, but I really don't think I can talk about it intelligently right now.
Is it something that's confined more to your static imagery, or is it something that could move into the world of motion imagery?
Well, there is that one example of the Al-Qaeda operatives who got caught with he got caught with a DVD in his underpants at an airport. And the DVD was a skin flick, and inside that skin flick was 140 different directives from various Al-Qaeda handlers. So yeah, it's the techniques vary. The discovery is very difficult because it's very difficult to find anything to compare, unless you had that original skin flick video to do a compare and contrast with. It's hard to see what got covered up.
I take it then that things like microblock analysis then wouldn't be fine enough to pick up on the difference between the lossless and the other elements in that, or is that a completely different chain of viewing it?
Yeah, that's a different way of going about it. I'm not familiar. What was that one that you mentioned? Because I'm not familiar with that one.
Macroblock analysis. It's usually made.
Yeah. Sorry, I misunderstood at first. That also is on my hit list of things to get a better understanding about. I don't know enough about it to comment.
Okay.
For all the examiners that are on this forum, how many actually come across this or successfully found this, let's say? Because I know in my career, I don't think I've ever found it, let's say.
I did, but back in the day, it was like 2005 or 2006, and it was a child exploitation case.
Yeah, there are a lot of examples of child pornography using steganography. It's that seems to be a hot spot for it.
So where do you start if you have 100,000 images from a device?
That's the difficulty. The only reason that the Shadows Brotherhood group, and if you want to look them up, if you really want to get disgusted with things, it's Shadows with a Z. And the reason they got caught is because they had a lot of files and they all had strange artifacts in them. And that once they started seeing a pattern of artifacts, then they could start looking at the files and determine that they'd been manipulated and contained hidden data. But yeah, I mean, my collection of photographs, I've probably got, I don't know, 30,000 photographs on my computer, most of which are my backyard and my cat. I don't know where you would start. It's extremely difficult to find that first indication. You really would have to find some sort of evidence of in the case of child pornography, you'd have to find some other indication that would say, okay, we got to tear apart this computer and start looking. It's not something that you can just do randomly and think you're going to find anything.
All right. Well, if you have any other questions, oh wait, there's a few more typing in.
Yeah, there was one from Mark about steganography tools that are on a hard drive. That can also be a really good clue, but a lot of times the steganography master file that you might be looking for will be on a WordPress site on some, website someplace. It's not going to be on your computer, and you're not going to need a dedicated program to discover that file.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending. Next week we have Aaron Sparling again. Sherman, thank you for doing the show. Much appreciated.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Have a great week, everyone.